My name is Medoff. I'm the owner and distiller of Bullrun Distillery here in Portland, Oregon. This is a large craft distillery, and we produce primarily whiskey, dark spirits, whiskey, rum. We also make vodka and gin. Everything that we distill has to be fermented first to begin with, and so that's where the tie-in with the craft brewing and small wineries. Whiskey is made from beer, essentially. Any sort of grain product, corn, rye, wheat, barley, anything you can ferment into a, quote, beer, you can distill then into whiskey. For instance, what I do with my whiskey is I just use 100% malted barley. I ferment it really hot and fast. It creates really big esters. In fact, it only takes 2, maybe 3 days tops for me to ferment my product out. But I go from, say, a 1060 specific gravity down to well below 0.1002, if not actually the real dryness, like 0.99 often. I end up with at least a 6.5 to 7% alcohol beer that I put into the still. And the simple way of talking about it is the 3 parts to a distillation. You have what's called heads, hearts, and tails. Heads are the alcohols that are below the boiling point of ethanol, low boiling point alcohols. The heart cut is primarily ethanol. That's what's going to be put into a barrel and a bottle eventually. Then you have what's called the tails, the final part of the distillation, which are higher boiling point alcohols, but they're still usable. But we never use them we never barrel those or actually put those into a bottle, but we can save those and recycle them and redistill them again. Well, our key ingredients are malted barley and sugar. Malted barley comes from Oregon. We are engaged in producing what I hope to be in the future to be an Oregon whiskey and defined as an Oregon whiskey. But we're using 100% malted barley from the Klamath Basin. It's malted here, actually Great Western Malting across the river in Vancouver malts the product for us. And then I actually use local breweries to do my whiskey washes at. And so they will process the product, and I bring the sweet liquor back here to the distillery and then ferment it. The sugar, though, comes from Hawaii. We are on the West Coast, and it sort of made sense to try and get a product over in this part of the world. But using turbinado gives us a much lighter, fruitier, almost agricole sort of character to the product. We designed Bullrun initially to have a large amount of capacity, and that was generated by the fact that we wanted to be able to supply a certain amount of distribution throughout the country, if not export. To really make a viable business, you have to be producing at least 5,000 cases of product a year to really make a small distillery, functioning. Yeah, well, the types of equipment we need here to sustain that sort of capacity is basically barrel space. Fermenters are also important to have an array of fermenters because that's going to be the bottleneck that you'd find in any sort of production facility. The stills, we only have 2 stills, but they are very large. They're 2 800-gallon pot stills, and that's what's really key to us is having large enough equipment to be able to produce a lot of spirit in a short amount of time. As far as our fixed costs and overhead, it's pretty set. Of course, we have our rent here and labor costs. And having built in certain efficiencies into my system, and by running our equipment, kind of maximizing it, running as many times a week as we can build a lot of efficiencies to the product. And so once we put the product into the barrel, I don't want to say forget about it, but the costs are kind of fixed on that at that point. And even though it takes up a lot of room in our warehouse that we have here, we can go up, basically. It's taking up less floor space, it's taking a lot of air space is what happens. Barrels are a very important part of the tools that I use as a distiller. Primarily, we're using new American oak barrels for our whiskey, because that's just the flavor profile that I like quite a bit. We use almost exclusively used barrels, used bourbon barrels and other used barrels for our rum. The cost can be very expensive to very inexpensive, depending on what you're going to be using. I can get new 2+ char, new American oak barrels for about $145 delivered to my distillery. Whereas the Oregon oak barrels, which are made by hand, much more well coopered sort of product, those are close to $650 a barrel. It doesn't take that many people to operate a distillery, unlike, say, a brewery or even a winery. There isn't many moving parts to it. As far as the fermentations go and where everything starts, bring the product in, processing it, clean the fermenters out, things like that. That's a one-person job. The stills are the same thing. If you can run a pump and pump things around, one-person job. When the still operates, it just takes one person. So primarily for almost all of our production, it basically takes one person. I do have an assistant distiller that participates in doing that. And then when it comes to barreling, we like to have two people around to assist in putting the product into the barrel, and then also dumping the barrel before bottling. We usually have two people. But then we like to have at least 3 to 4 people around during when we actually bottle the product, just so to be more efficient, and it won't take nearly as long to do. Bottling spirits is relatively simple. The federal rules regulating spirits are very precise. The alcohol content has to be pretty much exact. The fill levels need to be very exact. Before I even start the bottling, I'll know that I'm going into it with a lot of precision. Spirits don't have to worry about oxidation. And so there's no counterpressure filling with this. Our bottle filler is actually a gravity filler, very simple gravity filler. Once I have all the settings dialed in for the fill level, and I have to calibrate for temperature and all sorts of things, it's a lot of fun. But once all that's calibrated, we can start filling very quickly. There's no worry about oxidation. There's no worry about things, being contaminated in any way, because it's, we're dealing with at least 80 proof, if not higher, sort of products, and so it's a pretty easy process. But we try and get the whole process done at the same time. So we'll fill the product, cap and seal it, and then label it, and then get into the boxes all in the same day. Demographically, we're looking for people that are interested in what they eat and drink. There's a great culinary revolution going on in this country. It has been going on in this country. And that's really who our demographic is. Are people that actually care about, where the product comes from, cares about what they're eating, what they're drinking. The story, is very, very important. And that's everywhere. We're very fortunate here on the West Coast, and I say Oregon in particular, to have a very entrenched demographic that way that really supports local and really cares about what they're consuming. So we like to work with smaller distributors that are either more regional or more generalized, and also that have like beer and wine books, because we find that craft spirits need to be sold the same way you would sell a boutique wine or a craft beer. Sales of our products can be differentiated by different categories, or different places where we sell our product at. Now here in Oregon, we're a control state, and which basically means that all our spirits are sold through the state of Oregon or through a liquor store. But in the case of our distillery, you can also, in the room I'm sitting in right now, this is our tasting room / liquor store where to sell our products here. Right here in our tasting room, and being our location here off of Northwest 23rd Avenue was very fortuitous, because we get a lot of people coming by the tasting room, and this is a great way to interact with the public and expose them to our products, as well as sell bottles to our products. We're still very big in Oregon. 40% of our sales are right here in Oregon. Pretty much when we ship our product off to our distributors in other states, it'll go to the distributor, and then it'll go to dispenser accounts, which are bars and restaurants. That's really where we do most of our business at, and then into retail. I think the craft distilling model is a little bit different than the larger distilleries out there. Usually they will have massive amounts of money to do advertising campaigns and go to the consumer first, or advertise to the consumer first, where we have to go the opposite direction and get into the bars and restaurants and sort of interact with the tastemakers and the influencers. And by that exposure and having people pouring drinks with our product, having it on the shelf, that then will trickle down to the consumer. And so it's a little bit opposite. It's a little bit harder, longer process to be able to do that, but it builds a huge amount of loyalty that way. And so once somebody is hooked on our products, they usually stay with it. And usually if we can get into the bars, it'll stay on the shelf.